What are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? I want you to take a minute right now and picture it in your mind. Maybe it's a spider. Maybe it's needles. Maybe it's being trapped in a confined space. Maybe it's dangling from a cliff. Maybe your biggest fear is doing what I'm doing right now, public speaking. Go ahead and take just 5 seconds and picture it clearly in your mind. You can close your eyes if you want to, but picture what you are afraid of. Well, good. Now that we are all terrified and completely emotionally hijacked, we are ready to receive the good news of Advent. We are ready to receive what Advent has to give to us. The season of Advent doesn't begin with good news. It begins with bad news. All of our readings on this first Sunday of Advent begin with terrible news about our worst fears. If you look at our reading from Zechariah, Zechariah is announcing to the people of Jerusalem that all the neighboring nations are going to band together, surround their city, and attack them. Everything that they own is going to be plundered and taken away from them. Their women will be raped, and the population will be carried off into exile as slaves. This is not exactly a comforting word from the Lord. And then, I don't know if you caught this in our reading from 1 Thessalonians, but things aren't going very well for the Apostle Paul either. He is writing to the Thessalonians in the midst of what he calls distress and affliction. Things aren't going well for Paul. And then Jesus, in one of his final moments with his disciples before he's handed over to be crucified, leaves them with these encouraging words about the future. There will be signs in sun and moon and stars, and on the earth distress of nations in perplexity because of the roaring of the sea and the waves. People will be fainting with fear and with foreboding of what is coming on the world. Another way to translate the word foreboding there would be absolute dread about the future. That's what it means. Fear is about the future. Our fears are about what might happen to us. Whatever fear you pictured was something that wasn't happening to you right now, hopefully, but something that might happen to you. I used to think that the opposite of fear was courage, bravery. But as I've been meditating on the scriptures and talking with the Lord and facing some of my own deepest fears, I've realized that courage is not the opposite of fear. No. Hope is the opposite of fear. Fear is always future-looking, as I said. It's a type of anxiety about what might happen to us. Will that snake bite me? Hope is also future-looking. It's a type of confidence that we have as Christians about what will happen. Hope is the bedrock upon which courage is built. We can only face the difficulty in front of us with courage if we have hope for what lies on the other side of that difficulty, that challenge. And so hope becomes the antidote to fear. And Advent begins by telling us that there are fear-inducing things in our future. All sorts of scary things are going to happen. Jesus tells us that creation is going to rip itself apart before he comes back. But Advent also tells us something more. It tells us that there is hope for that future. We have hope because we have the Lord. In both the reading from Zechariah and in our gospel reading, there's this sort of pivotal moment where there's all these terrible things being described. And then it says, and then the Lord. Everything was falling apart. Everything was a giant mess. And then the Lord. Zechariah writes, then the Lord will go out and fight against those nations as when he fights on a day of battle. Jesus says to his disciples, "And then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory." Our readings tell us that our hope is that God shows up and shows out. Our hope is in God. That's what Advent is all about. We are longing and hoping for Jesus to return, for God to show up and show out, for God to wipe out all evil and suffering once and for all, and to set everything right again. And Advent starts with that hope this week. And today I just want to look at briefly 3 implications of this Advent hope for our lives. First, hope means that we have certainty about our future. As Christians, we get to know the whole story, even the end of the story. We summarize that whole story every week in our Eucharistic liturgy. What are the words that we say together? Christ has died. Christ is risen. Christ will come again. We know the end of the story. We say it in the Creed, he will come again to judge the living and the dead. We live in the tension between those two times. When Christ is risen, where Christ has come, where Christ is risen, but he has not yet come again. We have not yet been raised from the dead. Jesus hasn't made everything right yet. We're forever locked in Advent. You may think it's a 4-week season. Let me tell you, it's been my whole life season. The tension between the times. It's our permanent condition until Jesus returns. We're waiting for his coming again. And that's not an easy place to live. It's not an easy place to live in the tension between Christ's first coming and his coming again. In Galatians, Paul calls it this present evil age in which we live. It's full of difficulties and challenges. It's full of disappointments. It's full of disease, disorder, death. All these things should cause us to long for the day when, as Zechariah describes it, the Lord will be king over all the earth. That's what we're longing for. There'll be no part of creation, nothing in this whole creation that will not be redeemed and made new. There will be nothing in our future that is outside of God's good and gracious rule. There'll be no wars, no crimes, no violence, no politics. Can I get an amen? No malnourishment, no dehydration. All these things will pass away. Jesus says, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Jesus' words, which do not pass away, give us certain promises about our future. He has told us that we will be rewarded for everything we have suffered. Every wrong you have suffered, everything you have endured, you will be rewarded for. It will be redeemed and made right. He has promised that every tear, every grief that we've had, every tear will be wiped away. Every wound will be healed. Every wrong will be made right. If we believe that Jesus was speaking the truth, then we have this certainty about our future. That's what it's going to look like at the end. The Roman statesman and philosopher Cicero once said, "While there is life, there is hope." And he wasn't saying that as a Christian, but it certainly applies to the Christian. Jesus is alive on the other side of the grave, and that should give us great hope about the future. There is life beyond the end of our lives, because that's where Jesus is, and where Jesus is still very much alive. The resurrection of Jesus is the proof of his promises to us. Second, hope means we can have strength for the present. The end is never the end for the Christian. You know, when the scriptures talk about the end times, it's not talking about some sort of final curtain call of humanity. I think when people hear about end times, they get really frightened and scared. It sounds like a really scary thing. Like, oh no, it's going to be lights out for humanity. The earth's going to explode or something like that. And yes, things are going to be dramatic. There is going to be a remaking of all creation. But for us, that final curtain call isn't final. It's just the chapter in which we live. We are already living in the end times. We've arrived in the end times. It's this period of time where we're waiting for the end. But that shouldn't make us afraid. Being closer to the end of this chapter in human history should give us really great hope about our present circumstances. We have almost made it to the redemption of all things. As Jesus says in our reading, "Now when these things begin to take place, straighten up and raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing near." This is very good news. Don't be afraid. One of the ways I like to get exercise is I ride an exercise bike at the YMCA here in town. And they have these great bikes in this one kind of tucked away room that have all these simulated courses that you can ride the bike through. So there's like mountains you can go through, you can go along these picturesque coastlines. And I even did one this past week where I was riding a bike on a space station. How awesome is that? You can know that I'm a sci-fi geek just there. There you go. But anyways, I love these courses. I love riding through them and seeing different things and trying different courses. And when I ride on the bike, I like to push myself pretty hard. And I feel like I pretty much go as hard as I possibly can go from the very beginning all the way as long as I can. I just push as hard as I can. And so after about 5 or 6 miles of pedaling as hard and as fast as I can, going over mountains and up and down hills, my pace starts to drag a little. My legs start to feel a little heavier. I get a little bit tired as I go along through the course. But every time I do this, there's always a point when something changes. No matter how tired I am, no matter how hard I've pushed myself, as soon as I see the finish line in the distance on this stupid simulated course, my pace starts to quicken. I suddenly discover that I have more strength in my legs than I thought I did. I can go just a little bit faster for a little bit longer. My weariness starts to slide away, and I have just a little bit more to give. Because my redemption is drawing near. I'm almost done. Hope enables us to have strength for the present, because our redemption is near. Our everyday lives are founded on hope. You know, we go to work all week, some of us, because we hope to get a paycheck, right? Farmers plant seeds in the ground because they hope to get a harvest from those seeds. Martin Luther once said, "Everything that is done in this world is done by hope." Hope is the necessary ingredient that makes our present life possible. Without hope, we'd all just give up, right? In other words, our certainty about the future redemption of all things gives us the motivation and strength to keep pressing on, to finish the race. And third, hope means we can have redemption for the past. So we've talked about the future, certainty for the future, strength for the present, and now redemption for the past. Many of the causes of our hopelessness have to do with our past choices and mistakes, or maybe even our parents' and grandparents' choices and mistakes. Oftentimes, our vision for our future is constrained by our past. We can only seem to see into the future what we've experienced in our past. But Jesus came to set us free from our past. My 4-year-old son has recently had to have a series of tests done. These tests have required numerous vials of blood to be drawn from him. He had to be hooked up with all sorts of strange machines. Various orifices were being probed and prodded. I won't give you any more details about that. And my son's handled this about as well as you might imagine a 4-year-old would handle it. He's been completely terrified the entire time. And as we've been going through these tests with him, he says to me every time that I'm with him, "You go first, Daddy. You stick my daddy with the needle first," he'll tell the doctors when I'm sitting in there with him. "You go first." You know, and I realize that's really like a lot of us. It gives us hope to see someone else go through something and make it out alive on the other side. "You do the bungee jump first. I'll go second," right? "You jump in the water first. I'll follow right behind you." We have hope when we've seen somebody else do it first. This morning I want to tell you that Jesus did it first. Jesus experienced all the suffering and waste of this life. When the disciples saw him get captured and executed the next day, it must have all seemed like such a waste. The 3 years of work to start this kingdom of God movement on earth, and then Jesus ends up getting captured and killed, just like that. Jesus' life, which seemed wasted, was instead redeemed. All of his life was leading to his crucifixion and resurrection, and now he will one day be king over all the creation. That's what redemption looks like. Jesus will redeem every wasted life. He can redeem all the suffering, all your hopeless circumstances, because he entered this hopeless world before you, and he is going to redeem all of it. If you allow Jesus to enter your life, he will redeem every hopeless circumstance that you face. Jesus did it first for us. Now, I don't know what hopeless situations you're facing in your life. Maybe it's mounting bills and debts that you have no hope of ever repaying. Maybe it's that one family member who can just never seem to get free of their addictions. Maybe it's your health or your marriage or children or your job. Maybe it's loneliness. Maybe it's mental illness. All of us face seemingly hopeless circumstances at some point in our lives. And I suspect that many of us are facing some of those hopeless circumstances right now. The famous Anglican author G.K. Chesterton wrote, "Hope means hoping when things are hopeless, or it is no virtue at all. As long as matters are really hopeful, hope is mere flattery or platitude. It is only when everything is hopeless that hope begins to be a strength." We only need hope in hopeless circumstances. When things look to be at their worst, that's when we discover whether or not we really have hope. You know, it's easy to be hopeful about the future when everything is going your way. But Christian hope is hoping when everything is not going our way, when everything is going wrong. Because as Christians, we know the end of the story. We know that God will be king over all of creation. We know that he is a mighty warrior who's going to come in and rush in and save the day. We know that there's always hope. You know, the Lord can speak to us in all sorts of strange ways. A few weeks ago, there was a news article about the British street artist named Banksy. Has anybody heard of Banksy? Do you know who Banksy is? Okay. No one knows who Banksy is. His identity is totally secret. It's been one of the longest kept secrets in the art world. But nonetheless, he's incredibly famous, and his art pieces are, highly sought after and very influential. However, most of his art pieces are graffiti on the sides of buildings and on walls and on the street. So it's not the exact kind of thing that you can easily collect, that you can buy for yourself. One of his pieces was in the article that I read, but it was just the image of it with no words. Jack, do you have that image? Just the first one? You guys see that? And when I saw that image, I was just completely captivated by it. I couldn't stop looking at this image of this girl reaching out her hands to the red balloon. You can see in the picture, if you look closely at it, that there's a fierce wind blowing her hair forward, right? Blowing from behind her, pushing that balloon just out of her grasp, away from her. And you can feel the tension. Like as I look at this, I can just feel the tension in the scene. You almost want to rush in and help that little girl, don't you? You want to go grab the balloon for her and hand it back to her. Maybe shout some encouragement. Run! Go! You can get it still. So I got pretty invested in this picture, and so I started Googling it to see what I could find out what people thought about it. And that's when I realized that I hadn't actually seen the entire image. So when I Googled, I found the full image. Here's the full image. You have the other one, Jack? This is the full image on the wall. You can see the words, there is always hope that he wrote. Even when the wind is working against you, there is always hope. Even when life breaks your heart into 1,000 pieces, even when your worst fears are realized, there is always hope. I like to imagine, as I was looking at that, Jesus just standing on the other side over here, ready to grab the balloon and hand it back to that little girl. Because that's what Jesus does for us. He stands beyond all our biggest fears, all our hopelessness. He stands where we can't stand. He stands there to capture whatever is lost and to hand it back to us, to give it back to us. He's coming as a king to put everything right. Every little tragedy and every great disaster. That's our Advent hope. There are no lost causes. You are not a lost cause. There is great hope for you. There is great hope for your life. There's great hope for this world that we live in. There is always hope. Hope means we can have certainty about our future, strength for our present, and redemption for our past. That's the good news of Advent that comes to us in the bad news of our fears, failings, and failures. Have you ever heard the phrase, hope springs eternal? Have you heard that phrase? I say it a lot. I usually say it sarcastically. And as I was preparing this sermon this week, I was really convicted that I would say that to people sarcastically when I knew that something wasn't going to happen. Hope springs eternal. That ain't happening. And so as I got convicted about that, I looked up the poem that it came from. It comes from a poem by Alexander Pope. Listen to a little selection of that poem. Hope humbly then, with trembling pinions soar, wait the great teacher death, and God adore. What future bliss he gives not thee to know, but gives that hope to be thy blessing now. Hope springs eternal in the human breast. Man never is, but always to be blessed. The soul uneasy and confined from home rests and expatiates in a life to come. Hope springs eternal. There is always hope for the Christian because our best days lie ahead of us. There are future blessings guaranteed for us by the only one who can guarantee them, Jesus Christ, the King over heaven and earth. He's coming back to fulfill every promise, to right every wrong, to mend every broken heart, to capture every lost balloon. Hope means we can have certainty about our future. We can have strength for this present moment we live in, and redemption for all the past mistakes that we've made. That's the good news of Advent. It comes to us in the bad news of our fears, in the bad news of our failings and our failures. The good news of Jesus Christ. Amen.